as the Silicon Valley of the East, Israel has managed to become a reasonably wealthy country with a GDP per capita even higher than that of countries such as Germany or the United Kingdom. And not only that, it has also managed to position itself as one of the greatest technological powers in the world, despite being a country with just over 9 million inhabitants. In fact, it is by far the OECD country that invests the most in R&D each year. Actually, it is the country with the highest R&D investment per capita in the whole world, by a long shot. Its success has been such that, despite being located in the middle of a desert, if you go to a European supermarket tomorrow, you will probably find oranges, lemons, or even strawberries of Israeli origin. And all this thanks to the enormous investment in R&D we're talking about. An investment with which this country has even genetically modified plants in order to be able to irrigate them with semi-saline water from the sea or from saltwater aquifers. Amazing. In a way, it is what has come to be known as the miracle of Startup Nation. Thanks to which, in recent years, little by little, Israel's image in the world has been pivoting from wars and conflicts to technology and unicorns. But that process was suddenly smashed to smithereens when Hamas perpetrated its historic massacre in Israel on Saturday, 7th of October. We're talking about more than 1,200 fatalities and 3,000 wounded. The level of brutality exhibited was Dantesque. Naturally, the nervousness following the Hamas attack spread like wildfire. Suddenly, uncertainty and financial fear were back on the table. Check it out.
Israeli shekel falls to an 8-year low.
It was a huge drop that forced the central bank to intervene massively in the markets, with more than $40 billion to prop up its currency. Of course, this is just one example. One example which tells us that some things may change from now on following the terrible blow dealt by Hamas. The question is, what exactly could this new conflict mean for Israel's economy? To what extent is the so-called Israeli miracle in jeopardy? Well, in this video, we're going to see how the brutal attack by Palestinian militias could have 3 major economic consequences for Israel. Listen up.
The failure of the only solution.
It is something that has not been talked about much, at least outside Israel. But in recent years, the Hebrew government's approach to Palestine has undergone, or rather, given the circumstances, underwent a major change. You could say that it went from seeking a political solution, which never came, to Israel's governments, including those of Netanyahu, and later that of Naftali Bennett, going on to try to seek a kind of economic peace. The idea was that if the Palestinian National Authority, first and perhaps almost Hamas later, could offer their people better living conditions, then the conflict would diminish. And it was not just Israel's doing. The international community also threw its weight behind this new strategy by committing billions of dollars in development aid. All in all, this new gamble gained momentum particularly from 2018, when philosopher Mika Goodman proposed a new stratagem, one known as shrinking the conflict. And what did this new plan consist of? Basically, it was based on 2 premises. First, the creation of a single state would never be feasible because the Arabs would be in the majority. And secondly, when it came to the crunch, the 2-state bet raised many security doubts. Basically, for the Israelis, trust in the Palestinians, not so likely. Therefore, in his view, the best solution was to keep the conflict frozen just below the threshold of war, while gradually improving the living conditions of the Palestinian population. Well, as we say around here, no sooner said than done. Since then, that has basically been the Israeli government's bet. The fact is that under this new economic strategy, which, as you can see, was gradually gaining momentum, the Palestinian National Authority began to work closely with Israel to repress the more radical factions and to launch new economic initiatives. For example, new export processing zones were established in the West Bank. They also started to create secure logistical routes that allow Israeli trucks to safely enter the PA-controlled area to load directly into Palestinian factories, which logically saves significant time and money. As of September 2022, more than 20 major Palestinian companies in Hebron, Ramallah, and Nablus are using this mechanism. And above all, those zones opened the door for more and more Palestinians to work in Israel. First, Palestinians from the West Bank, and since March 2022, when Israel issued Resolution 1328, the door was also increasingly opened to workers from Gaza itself. The result? Take a look for yourselves. To give you an idea, in 2021, just before the last big surge of Palestinian workers in Israel, the income generated by this activity accounted for around 35% of Palestinian GDP. Probably in 2023, that figure has been well above 40%, so it's no joke. The stakes were such that the Israeli government has invested more than $100 million in recent years to train thousands of Palestinian workers professionally. And that's not all. The Israeli government also pledged to upgrade the Palestinian internet network and promote other infrastructure. Well, what can I say? In a way, the strategy was working. Palestinian incomes were increasing, and the growing economic and commercial ties between the two sides could have eventually opened the door to greater understanding and reduced security controls. And keep in mind that according to United Nations estimates presented last spring, the cost of controls and restrictions imposed by Israel alone amounts to 25.3% of Palestinian GDP. In other words, the progressive reduction of these controls could lead to an enormous economic takeoff in Palestine. In fact, it was exactly this idea, the notion that the Palestinians were primarily seeking to improve the economic situation, that caused, as we saw on VisualEconomik, Israel's security forces and intelligence services to dismiss any imminent threat from Hamas. A serious, very serious miscalculation. The point is that this whole process may now be frozen, suspended, or, at best, suffer a huge setback. Something that will obviously be bad, very bad for the Palestinian economy, but also for Israel. And not just because of the cost of trade or the number of Palestinian workers in the country being reduced, but above all, because of the uncertainty created by the fact that one of the few realistic solutions to the conflict could just end up in the trash. Of course, this is not the only economic consequence of the horrific Hamas attack.
Gas losses.
A few nautical miles from the coast, and very close to the city of Haifa, we can find a huge steel structure sitting on the Mediterranean Sea. We're talking about a 60-meter high platform that processes the extraction of a huge amount of natural gas from the Leviathan field, Israel's great energy treasure. A country that only a few years ago was considered something of a natural resource wasteland. Yet these days, we know that the reality is very different. Israel has much more natural gas than it can consume. What's more, they have a huge amount of natural gas located right on Europe's doorstep. It is estimated, for example, that Israeli production alone could meet the entire demand of the Netherlands. And of course, considering that Israel has just over 9 million inhabitants, it is clear that the gas industry is set to be crucial to this country. The major player is the US company Chevron, which has almost 40% of the Leviathan field, 25% of the other major gas in Israel, the Tamar field, and plans to invest billions and billions of dollars. Be that as it may, for the time being, about half of the gas extracted is sent to Jordan and, above all, to Egypt, a huge country with 110 million inhabitants that, in addition to a large demand, has the capacity to produce liquefied natural gas and thus export it to the rest of the world. In other words, Israel's gas is not just benefiting Israel alone, it is also contributing to strong economic ties with its neighboring countries. In fact, even Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth funds are investing heavily in Israeli gas fields.
You really have a level of regional cooperation that is unprecedented, said David L. Goldwyn, president of Goldwyn Global Strategy.
The bad thing is that this, precisely all of this, turns this industry into a target for terrorist groups such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or even Hezbollah, among others. I'm not kidding. In recent years, the gas industry has become a very important pillar of the Israeli economy. To give you an idea, today about 70% of the country's electricity generation depends on these gas fields, which has enabled it to reduce its huge coal imports. What do I mean by this? Well, a strike against these extraction, processing, and transportation facilities could leave the Israeli economy badly hit. There could even be power supply problems. Precisely for this reason, the structure and, in general, all the facilities are full of security equipment. Guards armed to the teeth, Israeli Navy gunboats patrolling the area, and a lot of technological equipment. However, if the Hamas attack on Israel has demonstrated anything, it is that nothing is invulnerable. For example, one of the production platforms operated by Chevron to exploit the Tamar field is only about 15 miles from Ashkelon, one of the cities in southern Israel attacked by Hamas. So logically, you get the idea. This platform could be particularly vulnerable to attacks originating in Gaza. In fact, during the 2021 military skirmishes, the Israeli government ordered Chevron to temporarily close this facility, and now the exact same decision has been made.
Israel orders shutdown of key gas field as war spreads.
In the short term, this will mean significant losses, but that is not the big issue. The point is that they are now going to have to reinforce the security of these facilities, whatever it takes. Not only that, up until now, Chevron seemed to be contemplating investing billions of dollars in a floating facility to process liquefied natural gas in Israeli waters. Now, all those plans could be slowed down. And the same is likely to be true of other international energy companies' investments in the country. In other words, even if Israel's gas venture continues on its way, the Hamas strike could already have led to huge economic losses through the cancellation or delay of major energy projects. And that's provided the terrorists don't succeed in attacking facilities that may already be on their radar. That said, we still have the third and last direct economic consequence of all this chaos. Let's get into it.
The end of apparent normality.
Soldiers, tanks, planes, radars, security checkpoints. The Palestinian conflict is not exactly cheap, neither for the Palestinians nor Israel. In 2015, a study identified that implementing the two-state solution, that is, building a genuine Palestinian state, would earn Israel more than $120 billion in benefits in the first 10 years alone. Trade would grow. The country would lose fewer working hours due to the massive mobilization of soldiers and reservists. The country risk would decrease, and security costs would also fall sharply. On the other hand, this same study suggested that the return of violence would cost Israel at least 10% of its GDP. And now, well, look at this.
The war against Hamas will cost Israel at least NIS $27 billion, according to Bank Hapoalim.
27 billion shekels is equivalent to about $7 billion. And here we are only talking about the direct expenses that Israel will have to face in defense and reconstruction costs. For example, Israel has mobilized 360,000 people who will have to leave their jobs for a long time to be deployed with the Israeli military. Then, to this amount, we obviously have to add all the indirect costs caused by the fear of conflict. For example, new security controls, higher country risk, and therefore higher financing costs, and the plummeting of industries such as tourism, among many other issues. And all this as long as Hezbollah does not want to join the offensive and spread the war.
Past experience shows that the impact of the war on GDP is expected to be felt mainly in private consumption and tourism figures, but the very large mobilization of the reserve forces and the assessment that the current war will last many weeks are expected to incur more direct damage to Israel's economy compared to previous combat operation rounds.
And then, worst of all, just before the Hamas attack, Saudi Arabia appeared to be on the verge of joining the so-called Abraham Accords. That is, it was about to recognize and normalize its relations with Israel. That would have changed the situation of this country forever. It would have been the definitive end to its traditional isolation in the Middle East. And of course, it would have brought with it a huge investment windfall. For example, since Israel and the United Arab Emirates signed these agreements in 2020, the relationship between the two countries has continued to grow. They even signed a comprehensive free trade agreement in March 2023. To give you an idea, trade between the two countries grew by 124% in 2022 compared to 2021, and in the first 5 months of 2023 by more than 40% compared to 2022. And that's just the beginning. The forecast now is that by 2030, trade between the two countries will multiply by at least 4 times compared to 2022. And in between, a lot of agreements have been signed and billions of dollars in new investments have flowed into Israel. Well, with Saudi Arabia, something similar was expected to happen. However, after the Hamas attack and the consequent Israeli response, this agreement now seems to be ready to be filed in a drawer. It seems unlikely that it can be signed in the short term. In short, as you can see, beyond the terrible loss of human life, the Hamas attack will also have significant economic consequences for Israel. The bill will be hefty. But having reached this point, it's now your turn. How far do you think the bill of this new conflict will go for Israel? And will it be able to put an end to the well-known miracle of the startup nation? Leave us your impressions in the comments and let's open a debate. And of course, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to VisualEconomik if you haven't already done so. Thank you so very much for watching. All the best. See you next time.